Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, July 1st, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about the start of a story to come for the future battleground state of Alaska. On your screen right now are the 2022 House election results in this state, in which the Democrat, Mary Peltola, decisively defeated the former governor of the state, Sarah Palin, also known as the 2008 vice presidential nominee for, at the time, Senator John McCain. Sarah Palin made it to the final round and lost by 10 points across this state to Mary Peltola, the Democrat. Now, in this state, Alaska has been and held a long history of being a solid conservative state. For years, on the presidential level since its inception, more times than not has voted for the GOP, and in recent history has not voted for a Democrat in many, many years. The last time being in 1964. Since then, Alaska has been a reliably conservative state on the national level. Since the start of the 21st century, Alaska was overwhelmingly Republican, voting for George W. Bush by 31%. But as elections have gone on, as you can see in many states, the conservative nature of the state has begun to die down. Alaska went to George W. Bush by 31 points. Then in 2004 went to him by 26, and then in 2008 went to John McCain by 22. Now, around this point in time, one could say it makes sense. Barack Obama had a decisive victory over John McCain, and yes, Sarah Palin was on the ticket, but generally speaking, Alaska still voted overwhelmingly Republican. And to that point, I say, you're right. Barack Obama, in this decisive victory against John McCain, still lost the state of Alaska by 22 points. By the next election, Alaska had narrowed down to being just a Mitt Romney plus 14 state. Fast forward to 2016, it hovers around the same, with Donald Trump receiving just 51% of the vote, defeating Hillary Clinton by 15 points. But then came 2020, an election in which Joe Biden was propped up as this more moderate, sensible Democrat against an extreme right-wing, very right-wing, conservative president who was unpopular at the time. And Alaska voters responded positively by giving Joe Biden 43% of the vote, with Donald Trump winning by just 10%. From the start of the 21st century, what was a 31-point victory has been reduced down to a 10-point victory. Then came the special election, the fateful one in Alaska, when Representative Don Young, who had been elected in every year since 1972, unfortunately passed away. It prompted a special election in which it gathered in some of the top names in Alaska politics: Sarah Palin, the former governor; Nick Begich, the grandson of the well-known former Democratic Senator Mark Begich, a recognizable last name just on the Democratic side running as a Republican. Ultimately, Sarah Palin and Nick Begich were in the state of Alaska and largely regarded as the top two contenders for this race. In the initial four-way primary, you found that four candidates advanced to the general election: Al Gross, the doctor who ran for Senate back in 2020; Mary Peltola, who served on a fish commission and served as a former state representative; Nick Begich, who served as the Alaska Senate minority leader. Who served, or didn't serve. He was a well-known last name to Tom Begich and Mark Begich, a big name in Alaska politics, and Sarah Palin, who I've already mentioned. But in this top four race, what you will see here is quite an interesting result. You see, Mary Peltola was never seen as this mainstream Democratic contender. In fact, in the actual results, Mary Peltola was about 5 points off away from being kicked off the top four ballot. She performed the worst out of the top four. Al Gross received 12%, Sarah Palin received 27%, Nick Begich received 19%, and Mary Peltola received just 10% across this ballot. But then Al Gross withdrew, and many people were shocked. They were shocked because Al Gross was a name that people recognized and a name that people had voted for in the last election. But following his withdrawal, he endorsed Mary Peltola in the race. He saw something that most people couldn't. And by the time we reached the general election, which wasn't actually in November, this was done back in around the August timeframe here, or let's see when the actual date was of the special election. It shouldn't have been too far off. August was when all the ballots were counted, but they announced the actual counting of them weeks later. And I remember watching the live stream in which many people were saying, there was no way that Mary Peltola was going to win this race. It was a top 2 race between Nick Begich and Sarah Palin. But ultimately, by the time you saw people transfer their votes, Mary Peltola ended up winning and defeating Sarah Palin by just a few points across the state of Alaska. We're doing an entire autopsy of this race because it tells you where the future of Democratic victories lie within the state of Alaska. They've adopted this ranked choice voting system that has worked for them. Nick Begich came in 3rd place, and a considerable portion of his voters, Republican voters, shifted over to Mary Peltola. She went from being in this point of 75,000 votes. The write-ins, a lot of them went to her. And by the time you saw Nick Begich eliminated, 53,000 votes were taken out of consideration, 27,000 gained by Sarah Palin. But get this, a third of Republican voters for Nick Begich went to Mary Peltola over Sarah Palin. Ultimately, it was enough. And for the first time since before Roe v. Wade, and that's important to note because it was what Roe v. Wade overturning allowed Democrats to do quite well in many of these elections, it was before Roe v. Wade that Democrats had held the Alaska at-large congressional district. And then came the general election, in which Mary Peltola not only was able to do very well in, she won by 10 percentage points across this state. 10 points in this competitive congressional district, starting off in the first round with 48.8% of the vote. 48.8% of the vote in a state that Donald Trump won by 10 in 2020, 14, 15 in 2016, a longtime Republican state dating back all the way to 1964. Yet Alaska was against electing the Donald Trump-endorsed extreme Republican Sarah Palin. And what you will find here, too, is that a lot of this was built on Mary Peltola's approval rating. When she was sworn into Congress, she was immediately adored by the state of Alaska. And a lot of it, I think, is because she has distanced herself effectively from the mainstream Democrats like Nancy Pelosi, like Chuck Schumer, and very much captures in this essence of representing Alaska at heart. Now, I'm not a native Alaskan. I don't know exactly how the perception is taken, but what I do know is that in every single poll that has ever been taken within the state of Alaska, she has come out on top as, quite frankly, the most popular politician in 2022 and 2023 in the state of Alaska. And what we find here, too, is that this poll was very accurate in terms of predicting the first choice preference. It was off by just 0.1%. This poll was a very good indicator of where the voters were going to vote and how they view candidates like Mary Peltola. Ultimately, 53% of voters in the state of Alaska viewed Mary Peltola as positive, 34% saying very positive, with just 27% having a negative perception of her in this state. That's important to note because it's exactly what allowed her to have that victory in 2022. This was September, before her general election, before she was able to win in the state. But even now, in recent numbers, the numbers indicate that Mary Peltola not only is still the most popular politician within Alaska, but that she could challenge the incumbent Republican Senator Dan Sullivan in 2026. Now, I don't know if she will. I really don't think that she is going to run in this race. I think she might wait for Lisa Murkowski to retire and run in the open Senate race. But Mary Peltola is a very popular Democrat. In this poll that you can see that was conducted in April of 2023, just 2 months ago, she has a 53% approval rating and a 28% disapproval rating. Compare that to Senator Dan Sullivan, who won in 2020 by roughly 15 points across the state with a 45% approval rating to a 41% disapproval rating. There was a significant higher portion of the population that disapproves of Dan Sullivan as senator, but doesn't disapprove of Mary Peltola. There are voters here that dislike Dan Sullivan but love Mary Peltola, and there are Republicans here that like Mary Peltola. Because at the end of the day, this is still a Republican state that has a Democratic representative. I have no doubt in my mind that Mary Peltola will be on track for victory in 2024. But they even asked the question, 3 years in advance, if the 2026 election was held today and the Senate matchup was between Mary Peltola and Dan Sullivan, who would you choose? Mary Peltola, again, this is one of the most accurate pollsters from the last election, from the special election, and probably will be for future elections. They found that Mary Peltola leads Dan Sullivan by about 3 points. I think ultimately right now she hasn't built up enough of a war chest and name recognition to win that Senate election, though I think she would become a very, very hot contender. I do think, though, in the future, she very much has a fighting chance. Mary Peltola right now stands to be the future of Democratic victories within the state. This wasn't just that she was exceptionally popular. Yes, she is exceptionally popular for a Democrat in a red state, but this is the start of a story to come. Alaska has been trending in a leftward direction for the past 2 decades. Nearly every single election without one blip has shifted in favor of the Democratic Party, with the exception of 2016. And even then, it was largely in part to the third-party response, because when faced up between that head-to-head matchup, Joe Biden did considerably better than any Democrat had in decades in the state of Alaska. Alaska also has a growing minority population. A growing minority population that what we know about American politics is that the Republican Party only wins one racial group, and it is white voters. Meaning that in every single state, regardless, of what it is, and I'm not here to treat minority voters as a monolith. I know that there are pockets in and far between many of these groups that do not vote this way. But generally speaking, when you break it down to what the census has as a determination for race and ethnicity, you find that only white voters handily give Republican victories in many elections, which means this growth of minority voters, this population influx that Alaska's seeing. I mean, we're not talking about droves and droves of voters, but we are talking about advancements in population. Things that may seem negligible, but when a Democrat wins by 10,000 votes in a state with, less than 1 million voters, that matters, right? That population growth very clearly matters and made a difference. It made a difference in 2022, and it will continue to make a difference in future elections. The presidential elections were one thing, but what we have seen on this congressional election is that Democrats have a realistic shot at victory. When faced off against an unpopular Republican, can allow Democrats the opportunity to win in a state and establish a politician like Mary Peltola that is now practically accepted and highly regarded amongst both sides of the aisle. That's what the goal should have been for Democrats, and quite frankly, that's what exactly happened within this state. She started out with 7%. Mary Peltola, or 10%. She was not this propped up Pelosi, Schumer, whatever it might be, Democrat. She was just there. She was vibing, right? She was in this race because she believed that she could do the best job, and the voters responded to that positively. She didn't lean into this Trumpian, really regular style of politics you see in many of the states that the Democrats have fought for. New York, California, a lot of the rhetoric is the same. In Alaska, it was very different. Fish, family, freedom, pro-gun, right? Still pro-choice, pro-gay, right? Taking all of the mainstream Democratic points, but adding an Alaskan twist on it, and it was seen as authentic because, quite frankly, it was authentic, right? So Mary Peltola has been positively responded to because of this, and Sarah Palin was just such a bad Republican nominee that voters simply didn't want them. Now, the Alaska Senate and the Alaska House also tell us an interesting story. This is also an indication of potentially a future to come. Democrats have a considerable portion of the Alaska Senate and a considerable portion of the Alaska House of Representatives. It's interesting, and I tell you this because I think it shows us exactly how Alaska can continue this leftward trend. They can elect people across the House, across the Senate, and on the congressional level that can become well-known and well-regarded figures within the state. I can guarantee you, should the Biden campaign want to invest in Alaska in 2024, because I don't know if they will, and I don't think it's super likely, but if they want to, I can guarantee you Mary Peltola will be there campaigning with him. I can guarantee you that she will bring over voters to his column. It's not going to be that Mary Peltola is riding on President Biden's coattails, but practically the opposite. The opposite meaning that Mary Peltola will be giving Joe Biden voters in the state of Alaska. And I wholeheartedly believe that. It's the start of a trend that has been continuing for the past 20 years in a leftward direction in this state that used to be solid red, ruby red, was never going to crack. And then came 2022, and Democrats elected the first Democrat in this state since 1972. Republicans, too. Independents, too. Voted for Mary Peltola. I'm not here to claim that in 2024, Joe Biden is going to win the state of Alaska. I don't know if that's going to happen, and it's not the likeliest outcome. But what I'm saying is that in future elections, there is a chance that Alaska narrows down to being a swing state, and by that nature, winnable for Democrats beyond this what many Republicans called as a fluke election, because quite frankly, I think Mary Peltola is on track for victory. Her approval ratings tell us this, and she, quite frankly, is on track to being a senator from the state of Alaska by the end of the decade. We'll continue watching this state. I will be fascinated to see what the Biden campaign makes in terms of a declaration. Will they invest in Alaska? Will they not? Many Republican and Democratic contenders don't even visit the state of Alaska on the presidential level. Number one, it's far. And number two, it's largely been regarded as this solid red state. It's a question as if, will Democrats tap into this blueprint, to this way that Mary Peltola has been able to flip this state from red to blue? Will they take advantage of that? Or will they allow the trends just to continue without any type of direct intervention? It'll be a fascinating thing to see. I'm so interested to see what the 2024 result will be. Donald Trump probably would win here by around 6 to 7 points at this point in time, but that means it's a swing state and definitely winnable for Democrats in the future. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.